Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The Islamic State has a new address, Pakistan. And this is not speculation, it's what their own government is saying, that the Islamic State is making inroads into their country. Does this bother Pakistan, or do they say the more the merrier? It is, after all, the world's terror headquarters. But for a change, Islamabad looks concerned, and the world should be too. We'll tell you why. In the South China Sea, the Philippines is giving Beijing a taste of its own medicine. It is building permanent structures in disputed waters to checkmate China. In the Israel-Hamas war, what is the end game? Apparently, they want to send Gazans to Africa and they're in talks with some countries. But will the world support this? Qatar supports terror groups, bribes Western lawmakers and FIFA officials and gets away with everything. We'll tell you how. Also, how did Japan pull off the miraculous rescue of people on board the plane that exploded? What's holding up the India-UK trade deal? Why India doesn't even need it, but the UK needs a reality check? Why China wants to build an artificial sun? How artificial intelligence has helped us find a new class of antibiotics for the first time in 60 years? And how do you deal with virtual rape? The UK is investigating a case on metaverse. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Twin bomb blasts in Iran killed more than 100 people. The explosions took place near the tomb of General Qasem Soleimani. On this day 4 years ago, the Iranian general was killed in a US drone strike. More than 140 people have also been injured in these blasts. Is the Gaza war escalating into a regional conflict? Israel strikes another neighbor. Its second attack in as many days. A drone strike in Beirut kills Hamas's deputy chief Saleh al-Aruri. It comes a day after Israel launched airstrikes in Syria. European Union sanctions Russia's largest diamond producer. The state-run Alrosa is the world's largest diamond mining company. It accounts for 90% of Russia's diamond production. So far, the Russian economy has been able to adapt to Western sanctions. Another day, another strike by doctors in England. Junior doctors are on a 6-day walkout over pay dispute. It's the longest strike in the history of Britain's National Health Service. Since March 2023, junior doctors have been on strike numerous times. Harvard President Claudine Gay resigns. Gay was under fire over her response to anti-Semitism on campus. She's also been accused of plagiarism. Gay, who took charge in July last year, was Harvard's first black president. And India will launch a communication satellite on Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket. The GSAT-20 satellite launch will be ISRO's first with the Falcon 9. The launch will take place later this year. Pakistan has a new guest, a dangerous but hardly surprising one. It's the Islamic State. And talk about a deadly combo. Pakistan alone is a major threat to regional peace. The Islamic State needs no introduction. And now they're together. So what's the story here? Pakistan's Interior Ministry has released a new assessment. It talks about terror groups in the country. The big focus was on the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Now, the TTP is a known threat. They've launched dozens of attacks in the last few years. But the Islamic State warning is worrying. Pakistan says it is trying to establish a foothold in the country. Their target? Shia Muslims and other minorities. We've already seen examples of this. In July last year, a political rally in Pakistan was bombed. Around 54 people were killed. Later on, Islamic State claimed responsibility. So why isn't the Pakistan army cracking down? For starters, they're busy elsewhere, like jailing opposition leaders, bringing back exiled politicians, and rigging elections. They have a lot on their plate. Basically everything except fighting terrorism. So it's a free run for these groups. In 2023, they carried out dozens of attacks. Put together, around 1,000 people were killed in Pakistan, 500 civilians plus 500 officials. It's the highest casualty in almost 6 years. So clearly, there is a problem. We'll tell you why the Islamic State warning is a big worry for the neighborhood, but first some background. The Islamic State in Pakistan is different from ISIS. ISIS operates in Iraq and Syria. This one is called ISKP, the Islamic State of Khorasan province. Now, Khorasan does not exist today. It's a historical region that once spanned Iran and Afghanistan. So, ISKP is named after that place, Islamic State of Khorasan province. It was formed between 2014 and 2015. The members were drawn from two main groups, the Afghan Taliban and the TTP. Both these groups had national ambitions. Afghan Taliban wanted to rule Kabul. TTP wanted to rule over Islamabad. But some of them said, think bigger. Think of a regional or international caliphate. So they broke away and formed ISKP. Its peak was in 2016. Back then, it had some 3,000 fighters. The ISKP did have links with the Islamic State in West Asia, but operationally, it was a separate entity. So why are they targeting Pakistan? A couple of reasons for that. Number one, Afghanistan is becoming a no-go zone. You see, the Islamic State and the Taliban are rivals. The Taliban are actually hunting ISKP fighters. And no, it's not because they've changed. It's because they have no other option. If Afghanistan becomes a terror launchpad, foreign forces could return, the Taliban may be toppled again, so it's all about self-preservation. As a result, ISKP fighters are pouring into Pakistan, and they're coming with weapons. The US abandoned a lot of hardware when they left Kabul. Things like guns, ammunition, and night vision goggles, they left all of it. The United Nations says ISKP is using those same weapons that the Americans left behind. Reason number two, Pakistan's reluctance to hit back. Since 2022, terror attacks have increased 93% in border regions, a 93% spike. Soldiers are regularly targeted in Pakistan, like last month in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a suicide bombing killed 23 soldiers. Yet the army is almost hesitant to hit back. They've chosen other tactics, like fencing the Afghan border and deporting millions of Afghans back to their home. The question is why? Why not fight fire with fire? Because of Pakistan's long-standing policy. According to them, there is good and bad terrorism. If they crack down on the TTP, it helps the ISKP. If they crack down on the ISKP, it helps the TTP, because these groups are rivals. So I guess Pakistan is caught in its own trap. They spent years choosing which terrorists to support. Now it's all coming back to haunt them. But how should the world see it? Well, the West is caught in a bind. They don't really care about the TTP. As far as Washington is concerned, the TTP only has ambitions inside Pakistan. But the Islamic State is a different ballgame. We are talking about a group with global ambitions, a group that targets the West. So the rise of the ISKP will worry them, should worry them. Same for the neighborhood. In 2022, the ISKP claimed 2 attacks in India, bomb blasts in Coimbatore and Mangaluru. Last year, an ISKP module was busted in the state of Gujarat. 5 Indians tried to join the group in Afghanistan. So the threat is real. And why just India? Other neighbors have also felt the heat, like the 2019 Easter bombing in Sri Lanka or the 2016 Dhaka attack. Both were claimed by the Islamic State. So it's a problem that affects the entire region. With the right intentions, Pakistan can end this threat. But right intentions are not Pakistan's strong suit. Now let's talk about the South China Sea. The region is becoming more tense. China is stirring up trouble and regional powers are taking a stand against it. Tonight we'll tell you about the Philippines. They've had a lot of trouble with China of late. In the last few weeks, we saw open confrontation. Beijing targeting ships from Manila, China blocking their movement, firing water cannons on them, even colliding with Filipino vessels. The provocations have been brazen and caught on camera. And China shows no signs of mending its ways, so how should Manila respond? Well, they have 2 options. Either use force, like a tit-for-tat response, or play a tactical game, give China a taste of its own medicine. And the Philippines seems to have chosen option number 2. So here's what they're doing. Building assets in disputed waters, in this case, the South China Sea. Let me show you something. This is where Manila's project is taking shape. It's called the Second Thomas Shoal. And this is what it looks like, a submerged reef in the South China Sea located in the Spratly Islands. China claims this reef. They say it belongs to them. But for decades, it's been controlled by the Philippines. And now they're strengthening their hold. Manila is building a permanent structure here, a facility of sorts. What for? To serve as a shelter. That's what the Philippine military says, that this structure is meant for their fishermen, for them to take shelter. Last month, a budget was approved for this. Over $1 million has been set aside for this project. And why is this project getting attention? Because of a broken ship, the BRP Sierra Madre. The ship is marooned on the second Thomas Shoal. It is a rusting piece of junk, but an important asset for the Philippines. This shipwreck is effectively a military base. It serves as a marker for Manila, also an observation post for its Marines. The Philippines deploys a handful of soldiers here. They keep an eye on the Chinese and they assert Manila's control on the island. If these Marines withdraw, Manila could lose rights over the reef. So their presence is necessary. And a new structure will only help them to reinforce their territorial claims and to establish a more robust presence. Last month, Ferdinand Marcos took a vow. He's the president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, and he said he won't give in to Chinese coercion.
We shall continue to assert our rights in accordance with the Philippine Constitution and international law. The recent incidents involving no less than our AFP Chief of Staff is worrisome. Yes, but it is a proud demonstration of Filipino courage against coercion and our firm resolve to protect, preserve, and uphold our territorial integrity.
China, of course, doesn't like that, so it's trying to create roadblocks. The Chinese Navy is blocking resupply missions. The Marines on the shipwreck need food, so Manila sends them special ships with food items and other supplies. They keep sending those. And China repeatedly blocks these deliveries. In the past, the Marines have run out of food. They've been forced to catch fish from the sea to survive. China has also stepped up its patrols. The Chinese Navy is more active in these waters. They've installed what they call a floating barrier just to stop the Philippine ships. And these actions come with a warning. Listen to this.
China is always committed to resolving differences through dialogue and consultation and making joint efforts to maintain maritime stability, but we will not turn a blind eye to the Philippines' repeated provocations and harassment.
So the tensions are clearly rising. A few months ago, the Philippine Coast Guard suspended a hotline with China. Despite Chinese threats, they continue to sail near the shoal.
The Philippine Coast Guard will not be deterred from implementing the President's explicit guidance for the Philippines to exercise our legal rights and over our maritime.
Filipino lawmakers want stronger action. They want more permanent structures and greater cooperation with the U.S. And it's all happening now. This week, the Philippine and U.S. militaries began a drill, their second one in less than 2 months. It's a 2-day exercise in the South China Sea. Both sides are also conducting joint patrols. 2 weeks ago, the Philippines held a drill with India as well, a maritime partnership exercise. An Indian warship sailed to the West Philippine Sea. Again, this is part of the South China Sea. And Beijing criticized this joint exercise between India and the Philippines. But Manila has disregarded these objections. It is mobilizing allies, asserting its claims, and confronting China head-on. Now let's turn to Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a lot to say about the war in Gaza. Every day he has a warning to Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran. But here's what he doesn't talk about. What happens after the war? Who rules Gaza? These are questions that Netanyahu refuses to answer, but his ministers have no such problems. Like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. He fears that Gaza will become a hotbed of radicalism, and it's a real possibility. You've just killed some 22,000 civilians, flattened entire refugee camps and driven millions out of their homes. It's the perfect setting for radicalism. So the Finance Minister has a solution, and this is what he's saying. If there are 100,000 or 200,000 Arabs in Gaza and not 2 million, the whole discourse about the day after will be different. Let me simplify that. This Israeli minister wants to expel Gazans. Not all of them, though. He says, let 100 or 200,000 remain, 1 or 2 lakh. As if Israel is doing Gaza some favor. And it's not just one minister. Another example is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He's in charge of Israel's national security. Listen to his plan. I'm quoting again. Not only do I not rule out Jewish settlement in Gaza, I believe it is also an important thing. Both these ministers are far right. They want Israel to settle Jews in Gaza. Just an obvious problem remains. Gaza is not an empty plot of land. It's home to almost 2.3 million Palestinians. Where will these people go? Reports say Israel is looking to relocate them. Netanyahu's government has reached out to multiple countries. One of them is the Republic of Congo, located in Central Africa. Around 52% of its population lives in poverty. Reports say Israel is trying to settle Gazans there in the Republic of Congo. They're calling it a voluntary movement. But will it work? Well, the Americans, for one, won't support it, that's for sure. The State Department has lashed out at both these Israeli ministers. Listen to their statement, I'm quoting again. This rhetoric is inflammatory and irresponsible. We have been clear, consistent and unequivocal that Gaza is Palestinian land and will remain Palestinian land. So Washington won't support it. Neither will Arab countries. Egypt and Jordan have refused to take in Palestinians. Chances are others will do the same. It's simple logic. There is a land dispute between two parties. One party picks up and leaves. What do you think will happen to the land? The party that remains will get it. In other words, Israel gets more Palestinian territory. That's a non-starter for the Arab world. So there's a lot of confusion right now, and a big reason for that is Israel's Prime Minister. He won't talk about his war aims. Last week, Netanyahu cancelled 3 important meetings, one with the war cabinet, one with Mossad, and one with Shin Bet. All 3 meetings were about the same topic, Israel's post-war plan. But Netanyahu decided to cancel them all. But why is he running away from it? Maybe he doesn't have a plan, or maybe he knows that there is no place for him in the post-war plan. Let me explain. Netanyahu's popularity is in the dumps. A recent poll confirmed this. Only 15% Israelis want Netanyahu to stay on after the war. Only 15%. Many of them want him to step down right now. Is that why Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging things? He says the war will last for many, many months. But looking at Gaza, there is nothing left to attack. It's just rubble and refugee camps. So the war cannot go on like this. There needs to be a proper goal. The closest Netanyahu came to talking about goals was last month. This is what he said.
The Philadelphia corridor, or to put it more correctly, the southern stoppage point of Gaza, must be in our hands. It must be shut. It is clear that any other arrangement would not ensure the demilitarization that we seek.
So he wants to control the crossing between Egypt and Gaza. But who will control Gaza? Will Gazans still be living there? Netanyahu has no answers to give. His silence is giving space to far-right ministers in his cabinet. Their words may not reflect policy, but they do make a bad situation worse. A bribery scandal has rocked the US. It's typical Hollywood stuff. Bags of cash, bars of gold, a tainted US senator, and a shady foreign power. Let's meet the characters first. The tainted senator is Bob Menendez. He's a Democrat from New Jersey. In 2022, he was accused of helping the Egyptian government. Menendez pleaded not guilty, but now more charges have emerged, and this time they involve Qatar. Now, the details are very interesting. When US officials raided the senator's home, they found a lot, almost $500,000 in cash, 13 bars of gold, and a Mercedes convertible car, all bought with bribe money. But bribe for what? Menendez was sort of on Qatar's payroll. He had good ties with companies linked to the regime in Doha, so he used those ties to set up meetings, to organize negotiations, and also to secure investments. Basically, Menendez was like an agent for Qatar. He was their man in Washington. Of course, the senator denies this. He's yet to resign as a lawmaker. In fact, forget resignation. He could run for re-election if not convicted. But this story is not about Menendez. He's just another politician on someone's payroll. Nothing new there. Instead, let's look at Qatar. They seem to have a knack for bribery. In December 2022, European officials raided 19 locations, all of them in Belgium and Italy. 8 people were arrested in one day. Some $1.6 million were recovered from them. It was soon called Qatar Gate. The face of the scandal was Eva Kaili. She's a European Union lawmaker from Greece, also a former president of the European Parliament. She and others were accused of taking bribes from Qatar. In return, they influenced policy. Whether it's voting in favor of Doha or making speeches or simply doing good PR, the whole thing came to light in 2022. It's been more than 1 year. Guess how many people have been convicted so far? 0. In fact, Eva Kaili is still in Parliament. Something similar happened at FIFA, the global footballing body, FIFA. US officials say Qatar bribed its way to the World Cup, and documents support this. Doha paid around $330 million to multiple FIFA officials. This happened in late 2010. In return, these officials supported Qatar as host. It's a feature of Doha's foreign policy. Can't muscle your way to influence? Just buy it. I mean, both legally and illegally. Take London, for example. The joke is that Qatar owns half of the city. Harrods, the Shard skyscraper, Canary Wharf, part of the Heathrow Airport, all of it has been bought up by Qatar. Same in Paris, the city's biggest football club is PSG. Guess who owns it? Qatar's rulers. So the policy is quite clear. Use oil and gas money to buy influence abroad. And if money fails, then fall back on Uncle Sam. Reports say Doha and Washington have secretly renewed a key deal. It allows the US to use a military base in Qatar, the Al Udeid base. And it's not just any other military facility. Al Udeid is the largest US base in West Asia. And don't forget, Qatar is also a major non-NATO ally. Plus, since the war in Ukraine, they've taken up a new role, that of energy supplier. Europe has stopped buying gas from Russia. Instead, they're buying it from Qatar and the US. France and the Netherlands have signed a deal with Doha. It allows them to buy Qatari gas for 27 years. What does that tell you? That the West sees Qatar as a long-term partner, which gives Doha a free pass, whether it's for bribing officials at FIFA or giving gold bars to American senators or wads of cash to European lawmakers. It's a dangerous game, though, because the same Qatar has a different side, one that cozies up to terror groups. They've supported the likes of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. But the West doesn't care. Bribes, terrorism, human rights. Qatar faces no pushback. I'll start our next story with a question. How many times have you paid attention to safety guidelines on a plane? Most of us don't. We just treat it as a nuisance. Yet every flight repeats the same instructions. Do you know why? Because rules and SOPs more often than not save lives. Case in point, Japan Airlines. Yesterday, one of their flights exploded into a fireball. It was after a collision with a Coast Guard plane. There were 379 people on board. They had a miraculous escape. All of them survived, 379 people. How did they pull it off? By following the rules. It was a textbook evacuation and a lesson on why it's important to pay attention to those flight safety guidelines. Here's a report.
Your attention please for the last two passengers. The last two passengers.
At landing, I felt strong shaking, and when I looked at the window, I saw sparks flying and burning. Even though I heard screams, mostly people were calm and did not stand up from their seats, but kept sitting and waiting. Another slide came down in the back, so I used the backslide and escaped.
On paper, it was a textbook evacuation. There was a runway incursion. The plane came to a standstill. Smoke started filling the cabin. Escape chutes were activated. And within minutes, people were out of the plane unhurt. It sounds too good to be true, but this is exactly what Japan Airlines achieved. On Tuesday, their flight 516 collided with a Coast Guard plane as it landed. In just minutes, the plane turned into a fireball. But the passengers and crew escaped. All 379 of them. How? By following the rules.
When you ride a plane, it shows the video about emergency escape. Now I indeed think that we should watch those videos carefully and keep that information in our head.
When the collision happened, at first there was disbelief. The plane was speeding across the runway. There was fire, there was heat, and there was panic. Outside the windows, all passengers could see a raging inferno. But soon the survival instinct kicked in. As soon as smoke entered the cabin, passengers could barely see, but the plane still held up. The flight was an Airbus 350, one of the first flights to be made of carbon fiber materials, so it could resist the fire for some time. And that's when the crew jumped into action. They had a few minutes and over 300 passengers to get out. First, they identified which exits were close to the flames. Those were avoided. Then the announcement system wasn't working, so the instructions had to be shouted out. Only 3 inflatable slides could be used, but even then, they were not properly deployed. That's because of the jet's condition. But despite that, passengers started sliding off.
I did smell a little bit of smoke, but I didn't see passengers panicking. We all got off the plane in about 5 minutes.
No one rushed for their bags or any other luggage. They just followed the instructions of the crew, and many believe that's what made the difference between life and death. Even though it was a textbook evacuation, it happened in the most extreme of situations.
I can only say it was a miracle. We could have died if we were late in evacuating.
But the love for rules hasn't come easy for Japan Airlines, and you understand that when you enter their office. Their corporate headquarters displays wreckage. It's from a plane accident in 1985. The JAL Flight 123 was flying from Tokyo to Osaka. It crashed, killing 520 people on board. It is the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. For the airline, it was devastating. They vowed to take safety seriously, to make sure nothing like this happened ever again. It looks like 40 years later, the actions have paid off. So next time you hear safety guidelines on a plane, take off those headphones, sit up and listen. One day, it could save your life.
Now let's talk about the United Kingdom, a sinking economy still masquerading as a great power. After the chaos of Brexit and rapid exits of 4 prime ministers, the UK is desperate for a win. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is betting on India. He wants a trade deal with India. He's been pursuing it since he took office. But a deal continues to elude him. Formal negotiations began in 2022. 2 years have passed, and yet an agreement is not in sight. Instead of a deal, the negotiators keep coming up with new deadlines. It's become a game of cat and mouse. Whenever the world thinks both sides are close, the goalpost is shifted. Rishi Sunak keeps missing opportunities. He visited India last year for the G20 summit in September. Observers were hoping for a breakthrough. It did not happen. A new deadline was set, the end of 2023, around Diwali last year. Diwali is the biggest Hindu festival, so the choice was obviously symbolic. Apparently, Sunak wanted to travel to India, sign the trade deal and catch the India versus England cricket match. India hosted the World Cup last year, so Sunak would have had the perfect stage to take a victory lap. But he missed it. The negotiators failed to deliver again, and a new deadline was set. March 2024, this year, just before India's general election. So time is running out for Rishi Sunak. Once the elections are announced in India, the trade deal will take a back seat. So Sunak is under pressure. The onus is on him to get the deal done. But why only him? Because India is not in a hurry. London needs this deal more than New Delhi, and I'll tell you why I say this. The idea of the trade deal is not new, or recent for that matter. When the UK left the European Union, the Conservatives turned to India. They promised a mega trade deal with India, one that would unlock the benefits of Brexit. Theresa May visited India. She was the first UK Prime Minister to pursue this. But she got off on the wrong foot. During her visit, she lectured India on immigration. She told New Delhi, take back your immigrants if you want more visas. A vice-chancellor was part of Theresa May's delegation. He expressed disapproval. He said, and I quote, "I feel truly ashamed." Needless to say, India did not respond to any overtures after that. May's successor was Boris Johnson. He adopted a different tone. He promised a deal by Diwali 2022. But he couldn't get it done. Then came Liz Truss. She was barely 45 days in the job, and the task fell to Rishi Sunak. But he too is struggling. Now, for a moment, let's forget about these politicians. Let's talk about the potential deal. What does India stand to gain? What's at the center of every free trade agreement? Goods. In this case, London wants lower tariffs for its key exports, stuff like cars, Scotch whisky, and wines. But does the Indian economy depend on these goods? It doesn't. India has many alternatives, other arguably better sources to buy from. Now look at India's exports. What do we send to the UK? Things like medicines, diamonds, and machine parts. And many of these goods face no tariffs in the UK. So technically, India doesn't even need a trade pact. It can manage without it. There are no substantial benefits to unlock. But here's what India wants: visas. Will the UK open up to take more Indian talent? It will not. And that's a problem, because any good trade deal also allows for the free movement of people. But as far as London is concerned, that's not on the table. In fact, it is making it harder for Indians to stay in the UK. Just this week, London changed some rules. Students in the UK can no longer get visas for their dependents, their family members. So why should India care about a trade deal with the UK? And we are not the only ones asking this question. Even trade experts in the UK have said the same. Let me quote from one of them. India negotiates as if it is a country with 1 billion people, which it is. In the UK discourse, it is the big UK negotiating with little India. But India is on course to be one of the biggest economies in the world. We are talking about a country that is huge and doesn't feel the need to cut a deal. And that's what it's about. India doesn't need to cut a deal. That is the bottom line. The British are still stuck in the past, when India was their colony. But that's no longer the case. India is a rising economic power, the fastest growing major economy in the world, and a large market. It also has a long list of trade partners. From the European Union to the United States to Japan, Oman, Peru, Mauritius, these countries or blocs are either discussing a trade deal with India or already have one. The United Kingdom is just another name on this long list, one that India can very well manage without. And the UK needs this reality check. Our next story is about an artificial sun, a man-made sun. China wants to make it. They've set up a company for it, a state-owned consortium that will create an artificial sun. But why does China need it? Because it is a power-hungry country in both senses of the term. It needs an unlimited energy source to fuel its expansion, and it wants to be a tech superpower leading the race to develop clean energy. And this race is very much on. The world is chasing nuclear power, nuclear fusion, as a source of energy. Countries have been trying to achieve this for years. Is this a contest that Xi Jinping can win? Here's a report.
Nuclear fusion. It's the holy grail of nuclear energy. An idealistic technology that can be used to generate unlimited clean power. There will be no dangerous waste products, no cancer-causing fuels. The human race will be able to stop using coal, oil and gas and apparently live happily ever after. Of course, there's one small problem. No one has been able to achieve sustained, safe nuclear fusion yet. Humans have achieved fusion, of course, but the unsustained kind, known colloquially as thermonuclear hydrogen bombs. But if brought under control, that same energy can be harnessed for all our electricity needs. Scientists from all over the world have been working to achieve controlled nuclear fusion for decades. You have big international collaborative efforts towards this, like the 35-nation ITER project based in France. The US, the UK, EU, Russia, India, China, Japan, and a few others are working together on this project. They want to unlock the power of nuclear fusion at a facility in southern France, and then share this clean, unlimited nuclear power with the whole world. But even though so many countries are collaborating on this, it doesn't mean they aren't trying to figure it out on their own as well. The US, the UK and Japan all have advanced nuclear fusion projects of their own. But one of the most advanced players is China. For decades it has been trying to race ahead with nuclear fusion technology. And it took another step towards that last week. On December 29th, while most of the world was preparing to usher in the new year, China unveiled a new company, China Fusion Energy Inc. It's a consortium of about 25 state-owned companies and research institutes. It is headed by the China National Nuclear Corporation. A fund has also been set up to finance fusion experiments. Why this sudden consolidation? Is Beijing getting close to creating the coveted artificial sun? We can't be sure yet, but here's what we know so far. The Chinese have been working to achieve fusion for years through something called magnetic confinement technology. What's that? Unstable hydrogen is run through a donut-shaped reactor. Magnets compress it at high temperatures. The hydrogen then fuses into helium and generates energy in the process. It's actually how stars like the sun work, which is why fusion reactors are sometimes called artificial suns. The magnetic fusion is the same method being tested at the International ITER site in France, but so far it's still in the experimental phase. No one has been able to sustain fusion for a long period of time. And that's the critical part. When enough fusion energy is generated, it will become self-sustaining. And that is when it can truly be considered an unlimited power source, a real artificial sun. Humans are still supposed to be a decade away from achieving this. But China is on the move now. It has designated nuclear fusion to be a national priority. Has Beijing discovered some secret it is keeping from the rest of the world? It would be on brand for China, so other countries should take note, especially if they don't want to get left in the dark.
Now let's turn to South Korea, where a brutal attack has taken place. A politician was stabbed this week, and not just any other politician. This is the leader of the opposition we are talking about. His name is Lee Jae-myung. He leads South Korea's Democratic Party. Lee was attacked in the southern city of Busan yesterday by a knife-wielding assailant. Lee was interacting with supporters and journalists when the attack took place. The assailant pretended to be one of his supporters. He approached the politician and asked for an autograph. And when he was close enough, he stabbed Lee in the neck. It happened so fast that Lee's security detail could not react in time. They subdued the attacker afterwards, but Lee was already on the ground. He was taken to a hospital in Busan for emergency treatment and then airlifted to the capital Seoul for a life-saving surgery. He survived. He's now recovering in the ICU. But what of the assailant? This is what the Busan police said.
The identity of the suspect is a man born in 1957, and the exact circumstances of the crime are currently being investigated.
The suspect is in his mid-60s. He's from the central city of Asan. The police raided his house today. He told them he'd planned the attack alone. He tried to kill the politician with a 13-centimeter knife. He says he bought the knife online. And this is everything that we know so far.
The Busan police will set up a task force with a total of 68 people, headed by the investigation department, to conduct a thorough investigation.
The attack has shaken South Korea's political establishment. Lee's political party is furious, and they issued a warning earlier today.
Investigative agencies such as the police must be deeply aware of the seriousness of the case and conduct a strict and prompt investigation. If political considerations, reductions or attempts at distortion occur during the investigation process, we will not sit by idly.
Why is he talking about political considerations? Because of who their leader is. I mentioned that Lee Jae-myung is the leader of South Korea's Democratic Party, but he's also one of the front-runners to become president. The election is in 2027, but he has a strong chance. He stood against current President Yoon Suk-yeol in the last election, that was in 2022, and he lost by a razor-thin margin. Just 0.7% of the votes separated Yoon and Lee. It was South Korea's closest election ever. The current president is barred from seeking re-election, which makes Lee an early frontrunner for 2027. Lee will be 63 years old during the next election, in the prime of youth compared to presidential candidates in some other countries. So yesterday's knife attack could have reshaped the playing field. And this is another reason why South Korea's Democratic Party is furious. But this country is no stranger to political violence of this kind. In 2022, Lee's predecessor in the Democratic Party was also attacked, again by an elderly man. The assailant struck the politician on the head with a hammer. There was another incident in 2006. An opposition party leader at the time, Park Geun-hye, was also stabbed at a rally. She, of course, went on to become president a few years later. Yesterday's stabbing may even help Lee get votes in the next election, but these incidents need to stop. South Korea needs to fix its political violence problem. They've seen enough of it for a lifetime. Have you heard of antibiotic resistance? It's when medicines become ineffective. They fail to cure a disease. And why does that happen? Antibiotics are medicines designed to kill bacteria, harmful bacteria. They're supposed to kill them. But over time, these bacteria evolve. They develop the ability to defeat the drugs designed to kill them. This is antibiotic resistance. It makes medicines useless. In 2019, it killed over 1 million people. So there was a need for new antibiotics, those that would work on drug-resistant bacteria. And it seems scientists have found it. The first new class of antibiotics in 60 years. Guess how they were found? With the help of AI, artificial intelligence, it could prove to be a breakthrough in the field of medicine. Here's a report.
The first antibiotic was discovered in 1928, so almost a century ago. And since then, it's revolutionized medicine. Common infections are not life-threatening. Surgeries are not life-threatening. Recovery is faster, and life expectancy has grown. By some estimates, antibiotics extended life expectancy by 20 years. So it basically changed how medicines work. But then came a new problem: resistance to these same life-saving antibiotics. It's usually caused by overuse. A 2016 study shows that 30% of antibiotic prescriptions are unnecessary, which means we don't need them so often. But that hasn't stopped us from using them, and sometimes misusing them as well, which creates the global problem of antibiotic resistance. Globally, it's one of the leading causes of death every year. In 2019, it killed over 1 million people. So scientists needed something new. And looks like artificial intelligence has come to the rescue. They have discovered a new class of antibiotics. This is for the drug-resistant Staphylococcus aureus bacteria. So how did AI help? It basically sped up the process. Finding a new compound is a long process. Artificial intelligence made it easier. It identified potential drug candidates, helped predict properties, and basically optimized the entire process. Now scientists have the first new antibiotics in 60 years. And artificial intelligence made the process easier. But developing a new antibiotic is still difficult. And there are 2 reasons for that. 1, there are scientific challenges. And 2, there are financial problems. Developing a successful antibiotic costs $1.5 billion. That's from the lab to the market. But the profits aren't that great. The annual revenue per drug is often less than $50 million. So there's not much money, which is why companies usually stay away from it. But new antibiotics are the need of the hour, because resistance comes very easily. In 1960, the antibiotic methicillin was developed. In 1961, scientists observed methicillin-resistant bacteria. Now, every year, it kills over 35,000 people just in Europe. While AI has helped in discovering a new class of antibiotics, there are many challenges which remain before it can reach your pharmacy. And when it does, we must be mindful of its usage, because overuse or abuse of antibiotics will lead to resistance. And that is a silent killer. By 2050, it could kill up to 10 million people every year. So the next time you pop a pill, be careful. It might do you more harm than good.
And our last story tonight comes from the UK, where a child was allegedly raped, not in the real world, but in the metaverse, meaning virtual reality or VR. Metaverse is a digital landscape where individuals can interact with each other. They can play games, work, buy virtual property, attend concerts, and apparently even grope people, abuse, harass, or rape them. That's what happened in the UK to a 16-year-old. She was playing a virtual reality game when her avatar or digital character was attacked. She was gang raped by online strangers. The child did not suffer physical harm because it wasn't an attack in the physical world, but she suffered nonetheless. Now, for anyone who's not experienced in the world of VR, it may not sound like very much. But that's the thing about metaverse. It feels overwhelmingly real. It is designed to be completely immersive. So the girl was not in real physical danger, but she suffered the psychological and emotional trauma of being raped. This is a landmark case. And for the first time ever, a virtual rape is under investigation, but there are complications here. Complications which are not limited to the UK, which apply to the whole world, to governments everywhere. For starters, the police is struggling with an enormous backlog of actual rape cases. So should virtual attacks take up investigative priority? That's challenge number one. Secondly, in criminal law, rape requires physical contact, but that's not the case in a virtual assault. So does it even qualify as rape? Thirdly, metaverse blurs geographical boundaries. People from different countries can play the same VR game. So which law enforcement agency has jurisdiction over which incident? There are many such questions. But one thing is quite clear. Governments and policymakers are not learning. They made the same mistakes with social media, and now they're not prepared for the monstrosity that is metaverse. As things stand, metaverse complies with existing laws, like laws related to intellectual property or cryptocurrency. But it lacks clear legal frameworks of its own. So virtual cases become difficult to solve, like virtual sexual abuse. It has different legal implications, and they're not fully understood or defined. So police chiefs have called on platforms to do more, to protect their users. But the response has been lukewarm, and I'll tell you why. Mark Zuckerberg thinks metaverse is the future of the internet, so much so that he's rebranded his company, Facebook, as Meta. He's invested billions to develop its VR headset. Now, Meta has responded to the UK case. It has said, and I'm quoting, "The kind of behavior described has no place on our platform, which is why for all users, we have an automatic protection called personal boundary." This behavior may have no place on the Meta platform, but it clearly exists. A number of sexual attacks have been reported on Horizon Worlds. That's Meta's VR game, Horizon Worlds. There have been complaints about the tool they mentioned, personal boundary. It's a tool. It sticks users in a protective bubble if they feel threatened. It stops players from interacting with other users, and it resembles casual victim blaming. This is the digital equivalent of telling people that if they don't want to get harassed, they should just stay home. It is old-fashioned misogyny repackaged for the digital age. And sexual abuse is only half of the problem here. Metaverse is being used by 400 million people worldwide. 400 million, 80% of them are children younger than 16. So millions of children can now visit virtual reality rooms where avatars simulate sex. They can visit virtual strip clubs. These are new avenues for cybercrime like virtual robbery, fraud, identity theft. And the laws we have today barely cover these acts because law is only playing catch up with technology. And tech giants continue to fuel these dangers because they make money out of it. Metaverse is lawless and free for all. Its only limits are the imagination, and it is not prepared for what it's creating. And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In India, a Namibian cheetah has given birth to 3 new cubs in the Kuno National Park. In the UK, Storm Henk wreaks havoc, battering the British coastline. And world number 1 Novak Djokovic showed off his language skills in Australia when he was asked to wish Chinese fans a Happy New Year. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day. In 1924, the sarcophagus of boy King Tutankhamun was uncovered. Inside was a solid gold coffin that held the mummy of the Egyptian pharaoh. King Tut's mummy has been preserved for 3,000 years. It was discovered by a British archaeologist called Howard Carter and his team. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hello.
新年快乐，你好吗？谢谢你们的支持，为你撑过我的好榜样。榜样。小的，是榜样。哦。